I'd like to take you beyond the walls of this room for a moment. I want to introduce you to the world as it will be once we reach 2 degrees Celsius of global temperature rise compared to pre-industrial levels. This world is a very different place from the one that you're accustomed to. In fact, parts of that world no longer exist at all. Island nations such as Tuvalu and the Marshall Islands have been engulfed by an estimated 56 centimeters or 22 inches of global sea rise. In the present day, the people of Tuvalu are preparing for this inevitability by creating a digital replica of the island in the online world of the metaverse. The dismal hope of this endeavor is to keep some semblance of the nation's culture alive once the physical island has been swallowed by the sea. I'd like you to imagine America being subjected to this fate, and the only world you've ever known and loved resigned to languish into pixelated obscurity through the lens of a VR headset. Next, let's move to the Arctic, but no need to worry about bringing a jacket, because the summers here will be completely free of ice once every 10 years. Or maybe you'd prefer to see the coral reefs. 98% of them are dead now. But if skeletal white tombs devoid of life are your thing, then you've come to the right place. If we hurry, maybe you can check out the 18% of land animal species that will be threatened with extinction at 2 degrees Celsius of warming. Or you might be interested in seeing the decimated coastal cities of our overheated world, where flood loss damages alone have reached $11.7 trillion annually. I know you probably don't have time for all that, but I do want to introduce you to the hundreds of millions of people that are now subject to severe drought and water scarcity. Please, look into the eyes of the 1.5 billion climate refugees who have been forced to leave their scorched and flooded homelands. 1.5 billion human beings looking for somewhere to go in a world that's become increasingly tribal, increasingly food insecure, and increasingly devoid of places left to escape to. Luxuriate with me in the bullets and the bloodshed of the constant state of war we're now in, with nations attacking one another over scarce resources, over the tensions of unprecedented human displacement, and over which powers get to control the geoengineering science experiments to which we've turned out of desperation, which are likely to improve conditions in certain regions while conversely exacerbating the instability of others. At this point, I can understand if you're having trouble envisioning a world like the one I've described. The world of 2 degrees Celsius of warming is one unrecognizable to modern-day humans. The relatively stable climate we've enjoyed for the past several thousand years has allowed us to thrive and advance, and has ironically provided us with the conditions necessary for us to be able to engineer our own downfall as a species. We know for an indisputable fact that the release of greenhouse gases into our atmosphere caused by human industrial activity, namely the production and use of fossil fuels, is heating our planet at such a rate that it threatens our very survival. There is no debate about this. The science is as settled as science gets, and with widespread global consensus. At the present time, human activity has heated the planet somewhere between 1.1 and 1.3 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. For years now, the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, has cited 1.5 degrees Celsius as a necessary threshold to which we must restrict temperature rise in order to mitigate the catastrophic effects of heating. It is at this point that we become increasingly likely to encounter climate tipping points and be swallowed into vicious feedback loops, or cyclical changes which feed into and accelerate one another. An example of this would be the melting of permafrost, which would release stored methane into the atmosphere, which would then cause more heating and more melting, more releasing of methane, and so on and so forth. The 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold is so important, in fact, that those nations I mentioned, such as the Marshall Islands, have adopted the slogan 1.5 to stay alive, to stress the urgency of this limit to the survival of human civilization. At this point, anyone who's not a complete sociopath should be asking, how near are we to meeting the climate goals that would keep us at 1.5 C of warming? Well, late last month, the IPCC released the most recent synthesis report, which answers this very question. The report has been referred to as a final warning on the climate crisis, so you probably already have a strong idea of what that answer is going to be. Included in this report is the graph which I have here with me today, which highlights 3 very important values. This blue line at the very bottom represents the global limits on CO2 equivalent emissions that we would need to enact over time in order to maintain the crucial line of 1.5 C of warming. To be clear, this isn't a trajectory that would allow us to quote-unquote fix climate change, but one that might possibly give us a glimmer of hope to avoid the absolute worst that's to come. Millions of lives would still be unjustly and irrevocably destroyed at this level. Next, we have this green line, which leads us to the hell on earth I've previously described for you. That is, these are the necessary limits on our emissions for us to remain at 2 degrees Celsius of warming. To reiterate, 1.5 C is the point where things really begin to spiral out of control, and every fraction of a degree beyond this will lead to greater and greater chaos. If there is any truth whatsoever to humans' perceived status as moral animals, it should go without saying that 2 degrees Celsius of warming is wholly and completely unacceptable. Finally, we arrive at this third line, which, if you are not able to make it out, is red. At this point, you might be thinking that this probably does not bode well for us, and you are correct. This red line represents the policies that are currently in place around the globe to limit the release of CO2 equivalent emissions into our atmosphere. And where, you should be wondering, do these policies bring us in terms of our projected increase in temperature? 3.2 degrees Celsius. Sit with that information for a moment. Ruminate on what I've just finished telling you about the consequences of us crossing half a degree beyond the limit of 1.5 C of warming. Now imagine that limit more than doubled instead. The thought alone is simply unconscionable. And yet, astonishingly, this may not even be the worst case scenario we face given our current pledges. As staggering as that idea is, it has been compellingly argued that our present models of predicting temperature rise may actually fail to factor in chaotic feedback loops of the sort I mentioned earlier.